It began like any other day, an unremarkable, crisp autumn evening. Golden leaves swirled in the wind outside the kitchen window, and the familiar scent of roasted chicken filled the air. I hummed along to a catchy tune from the radio as I set the table for two. Our life had fallen into a comforting rhythm, predictable but safe, and I found solace in the simplicity. Robert would be home soon, and we'd enjoy dinner together, maybe watch a movie afterward, laughing at the predictability of the plot. Our routines were our refuge. But that night, our carefully constructed world shattered. The doorbell rang just as I placed the last dish on the table. Wiping my hands on a towel, I headed to the door, expecting to see the neighbor's kids selling cookies or a package delivery. My mind wandered as I turned the knob, but when the door swung open, reality crashed in with brutal force. 2 police officers stood on my front porch, their faces stern and unyielding. The warmth of the evening seemed to drain away, replaced by a cold dread that settled deep in my bones. "Mrs. Davenport?" the male officer asked, his voice devoid of warmth, flat and professional. "Yes?" I replied, an uneasy tremor in my voice. The sense that something was terribly wrong gripped me. "We're here for your husband, Robert Davenport," the officer continued, his words precise, rehearsed. "Is he home?" For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. "Robert? What? What is this about?" The female officer, her expression unreadable, stepped forward. "We have a warrant for his arrest, ma'am. He's being charged with embezzlement." The word struck me like a physical blow. "Embezzlement?" I repeated, the word foreign and bitter on my tongue. There must be some mistake. Robert would never. "Ma'am, is he home?" The male officer interrupted, his tone growing firm, impatient. My voice wavered as I pointed toward the living room. "Yes, he's inside." They moved past me, their heavy footsteps echoing through the house. I followed in a daze, my thoughts a frantic whirl. Embezzlement? How could this be possible? Robert was meticulous with money, always so responsible, so careful. When we reached the living room, Robert looked up from his newspaper, startled by the sudden invasion. His confusion mirrored my own, but in his eyes, I saw something else too, fear. "Robert Davenport?" the officer asked, stepping forward. "Yes, that's me," Robert replied, standing slowly. His gaze flicked to mine, seeking reassurance, but finding none. "You're under arrest for the embezzlement of funds from Archwell Industries," the officer continued, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words blurred into the background as my world tilted on its axis. I watched in horror as they cuffed Robert, his hands trembling. This couldn't be happening. It was like a nightmare, a dark, twisted dream from which I couldn't wake up. "Victoria, call my lawyer," Robert said, his voice unnervingly calm, even as his eyes betrayed his fear. "This is a mistake. I'll be home soon." I nodded numbly, reaching for my phone with shaking hands. They led him out of the house, the door closing with a heavy thud, leaving behind a suffocating silence. The dinner I had lovingly prepared sat untouched on the table, the aroma of roasted chicken suddenly nauseating. The days that followed passed in a haze, lawyers, court dates, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. People stared at me with pity, suspicion, and something worse, judgment. The newspapers were relentless, splashing Robert's name across the headlines, dragging our life through the mud. I avoided them, but the whispers still reached me, curling around my thoughts like dark smoke. I wanted, needed, to believe in his innocence. But as evidence mounted, my faith began to crack. The prosecution painted a damning picture. Robert had siphoned millions from Archwell, hiding the money in offshore accounts. It sounded so cold, so calculated. How could the man I loved, my Robert, do something so monstrous? Then came the day that shattered whatever remained of my illusions. The rain drummed against the car window as I pulled up to the county jail, the gray sky mirroring the turmoil inside me. I hesitated before stepping out, a small voice in the back of my mind begging me to turn around, to forget this visit. But I couldn't. I had to see him, had to hear his side, had to believe that there was some explanation that would make this all make sense. Inside, the sterile visitation room felt suffocating. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a constant reminder of the reality I wanted to escape. I sat on the edge of the hard plastic chair, hands clenched in my lap, my heart pounding as I waited. When the door finally opened, and Robert walked in, my breath caught in my throat. He looked older, worn down, like the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. But when his eyes met mine, he smiled, briefly, hesitantly, the same smile that had once made me fall in love with him. For a fleeting moment, I let myself believe that everything would be okay. "Victoria," he said, his voice strained but warm, as he sat down across from me. The guard hovered nearby, giving us a semblance of privacy. "Robert," I whispered, my throat tight. "How are you holding up?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's tough. But I'm managing. What about you? How are you?" I forced a smile, brittle and fragile. "I'm fine. Just worried about you. The lawyer says we have a good chance of fighting this. We just need to." "Victoria," he interrupted, his tone suddenly serious. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" He glanced around, his expression tense, before leaning closer. "There's someone else involved in this. Someone I've been trying to protect." A cold chill settled in my chest. "What do you mean?" "Who?" He closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing himself. When he opened them again, the guilt was plain to see. "Her name is Nora." "Nora?" I echoed, the name tugging at the edges of my memory. And then it hit me, Nora, his colleague. The one I'd met at the Christmas party. The one who'd laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, stood a little too close. "Nora from the office?" "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Nora and we've been involved for a while now. She's the one who started the embezzlement. But she has kids, Victoria. She couldn't go to prison. So I took the blame." I stared at him, my mind reeling. You took the blame? You're going to prison for her?" He nodded, his eyes pleading. "I couldn't let her children suffer. But it's you I love, Victoria. It's always been you." "Always been me?" I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. "You've been betraying me with her, and now you're telling me you did this because you love her?" "No," he insisted, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. "It's not like that." I was confused. "I made mistakes. But I love you. Please, believe that." "Believe you?" My voice rose, trembling with anger. The clock's soft ticking filled the empty bedroom, each second stretching painfully into the next. I sat on the edge of the bed, my eyes glued to the hand slowly circling the dial. Any moment now, Robert would walk through the door. After 6 months of prison visits and sleepless nights, today was supposed to be different. Today was the day he'd finally come home. The house was immaculate. I had scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, rearranged the pillows on the couch a dozen times, and cooked his favorite meal, spaghetti with homemade marinara and garlic bread. The comforting aroma of the simmering sauce lingered in the air, a small respite from the anxiety twisting in my stomach. But as the minutes dragged on, that familiar knot of worry tightened. Robert had been released that morning, yet it was now well past dinner. Where was he? I dialed his number again, straight to voicemail. My fingers trembled as I left another message, my voice a shaky whisper. "Robert, it's me. Please call me. I'm worried." The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. After everything we'd been through, I couldn't break down now. I had promised to stand by him, to keep believing. But as the hours ticked by, doubt gnawed at the edges of my resolve. Finally, just as the clock struck 10, I heard the faint jangle of keys outside the door. Relief surged through me, and I rushed to the hallway. The door creaked open, revealing Robert standing in the doorway, looking worn and distant, like a shadow of the man I once knew. "Robert," I exclaimed, hurrying towards him. "Where have you been?" "I've been worried sick." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a sigh. His eyes met mine briefly before they flickered away. A flicker of guilt crossed his face, but he quickly masked it. "Victoria, we need to talk." His words froze me in place. The coldness in his voice, the absence of warmth or relief, it was all wrong. My heart skipped a beat, my stomach churning with dread. "What's going on, Robert?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He looked down, avoiding my gaze. "I went to see Nora." Nora. The name was a dagger, twisting deep. I had tried to believe that prison had severed whatever connection they had. I had tried to push her out of my mind. But now, hearing her name again, the old wounds reopened, raw and aching. You went to see her?" I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. "Yes," he admitted, finally meeting my eyes. "I needed to talk to her. To figure things out." "Figure things out?" My voice wavered, the accusation sharp. "You told me you were done with her, Robert. You said you wanted to make things right with us." "I did," he replied softly. "I meant it. But things have changed." "Changed? What do you mean? What's changed?" He hesitated, and in that moment, I knew. I knew what he was going to say, but I needed to hear it. "I'm leaving," he said quietly, his words flat and emotionless. "I'm leaving you, Victoria. I'm going to be with Nora." The room spun around me, my breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to close in, the ground slipping away. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything. "You're leaving me?" I choked out, the betrayal cutting deeper than I imagined. "After all I've done for you? After I stood by you, defended you? You're just going to walk away?" Robert looked down, unable to face me. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I never wanted to hurt you. But I love Nora. I've always loved her." The words were like a slap to the face, each syllable unraveling the life we'd built together. "But you told me. You said you loved me. How could you do this, Robert? How could you lead me on like this?" "I didn't mean to," he murmured. "I thought I could make it work. But my heart was never really here. It was always with her." Anger flared within me, burning away the shock. "So that's it? You're just throwing away everything we had? All those years, all those memories, they mean nothing to you?" "They do mean something," he said, finally looking at me with sorrow, but not the regret I desperately wanted to see. "But I can't change how I feel. I can't pretend anymore." The tears I had been holding back blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Not now. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You pack up and leave? Run back to her as if none of this ever happened?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'll make sure you're taken care of, Victoria. You won't have to worry about anything. Except that my husband is leaving me for another woman," I spat bitterly. "That's something you can't take care of." He flinched but didn't argue. He simply stood there, silent and defeated, as if his decision had been made long before he walked through that door. I wanted to scream, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he had caused me. But all I could manage was a quiet, broken whisper. "Why, Robert? Why did you lie to me? Why did you make me believe we had a chance?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to face the truth. But now, I have to." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to fight for. The man I had loved, the man I had built my life around, was gone, replaced by a stranger. "Then go," I whispered, turning away. "Just go." He hesitated, then nodded, walking out of the room, leaving me alone in the cold silence of our once happy home. I listened as he moved through the house, the sound of drawers opening and closing as he packed. Each noise was a dagger, a reminder of the life he was so easily abandoning. When the front door finally clicked shut behind him, I collapsed onto the bed, letting the tears I had held back finally flow. I buried my face in the pillows, sobbing until there was nothing left but emptiness. Time lost all meaning as I lay there, alone in the dark, the silence of the house deafening. But somewhere, buried beneath the layers of pain, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. That maybe, one day, I would find a way to heal. But tonight, all I could do was grieve. And so, I let the tears flow. The months following Robert's departure blurred into a monotonous haze. Days bled into nights, each one indistinguishable from the last. My world became a series of motions devoid of meaning. Every morning, I forced myself out of bed, plastered on a hollow smile for the outside world, pretending that my life hadn't just crumbled to dust. But at night, when the silence of the house settled like a weight on my chest, my facade shattered. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the echoes of what once was. It wasn't until one afternoon, standing in the grocery store aisle, staring blankly at a box of cereal, that I realized something had to change. I couldn't remember why I had come. My life, as I had known it, was over. But that didn't mean I had to be. That night, with the house quiet around me, I made a promise to myself. I would rebuild. Not for Robert. Not for the memories we once shared. But for me. I had given so much of myself to that marriage that I had forgotten who I was. Now, it was time to reclaim what was left. The first step was small but significant. I enrolled in a photography class at the local community center, a hobby I had always loved but set aside for Robert's ambitions. Walking into that first class, the familiar weight of the camera in my hands, I felt a spark of excitement. A tiny flame flickered within me, a reminder of the person I used to be before my life became entangled in someone else's. Weekends soon filled with photo walks, the city becoming my canvas. I found solace in the way light danced across leaves, in the quiet stillness of early morning streets. Each click of the shutter was a reminder that there was still beauty in the world, even if my life felt like a shattered puzzle with missing pieces. One Saturday morning, while exploring the city with my camera in hand, I wandered into a small, cozy cafe I had never noticed before. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries greeted me as I stepped inside. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of contentment. Finding a table by the window, I settled in, sipping my coffee as I reviewed the photos from that morning. It was a quiet moment, a peaceful one, and I let myself savor it. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" The voice startled me. Looking up, I saw a man with kind eyes and a warm smile. He was tall, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he had just come in from the wind outside. There was something familiar about him, though I couldn't quite place it. "No, it's not taken," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Feel free." He sat down, setting his coffee cup on the table. "Thanks. It's getting crowded in here." I nodded, suddenly aware of the bustling cafe around us. "Yeah, seems like a popular spot." He glanced at the camera resting on the table. "Photography, huh? That's a nice camera." "Thanks," I said, glancing down at it. "I'm just getting back into it. It's been a while since I had time for hobbies." He tilted his head, studying me for a moment. "If I'm not mistaken, didn't we meet at the community center? Photography class?" Recognition dawned. "Oliver, right? You were in that workshop last month." He chuckled. "Yeah, that's me. Small world, huh?" A smile tugged at my lips. Oliver had been one of the quieter students in the class, but I remembered him well. He had an eye for detail and a knack for capturing emotion in his photos. We had exchanged a few words during the workshop, but nothing more. As we fell into easy conversation, discussing our favorite photography spots in the city and the challenges of capturing the perfect shot, I found myself laughing more than I had in months. With Oliver, I didn't feel the need to hide my pain or pretend to be someone I wasn't. I could just be me. Would you like to join me on a photo walk sometime? Oliver asked after a while, his tone casual but hopeful. It's always more fun with someone else. I hesitated, the remnants of my old life tugging at me. But then I remembered the promise I had made to myself, to rebuild, to reclaim my life. This was part of that journey, wasn't it? Taking risks, letting people in, finding joy again. I'd like that, I said, smiling. That sounds like fun. And so, it began. Our photo walks became a regular occurrence, Saturdays spent exploring the city, cameras in hand, capturing moments and memories. With each passing week, I found myself looking forward to our outings more and more. Oliver had a way of making me feel at ease, of making the world feel lighter. As we spent more time together, our friendship deepened. We started meeting up for coffee after our walks, then dinners, then late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. He listened without judgment, offering support without pity. He never pressured me to talk about Robert, but when I finally did, he was there, ready to listen. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't with anyone else. I never thought I'd find happiness again, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. After Robert. After everything, I felt so broken. Like I'd lost a part of myself. Oliver turned to me, his expression soft but serious. You didn't lose yourself, Victoria. You're still here, still standing. You're stronger than you think. His words hit me with a force I hadn't expected, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was stronger than I realized. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. For being here. For everything. He smiled, reaching out to take my hand in his. You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad I can be part of your life. We sat there in silence for a while, watching the sky change colors as the sun dipped below the horizon. And in that moment, I realized something important. I was no longer just surviving. I was living again. Over the next few months, Oliver and I grew even closer. What had started as a friendship blossomed into something deeper, something more profound. He was gentle, patient, and kind, the complete opposite of the storm that had been my life with Robert. One evening, after a particularly beautiful day by the lake, Oliver turned to me with a question that caught me off guard. Victoria, he began, his voice serious but laced with affection. I know we've both been through a lot, and I don't want to rush anything. But I care about you. A lot. And I was wondering, would you consider taking this to the next level? Being more than just friends? I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, fear gripped me, the fear of opening myself up again, of being hurt. But then I looked into his eyes, and all I saw was sincerity. He wasn't Robert. He wasn't asking me to sacrifice myself for his happiness. He was offering me a chance at something real, something genuine. And for the first time, I felt ready to say yes. I would like that, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. I would like that a lot. The smile that spread across his face was the kind of smile that reached all the way to his eyes, lighting them up with warmth and joy. He leaned in, gently brushing his lips against mine, and in that kiss, I felt the promise of something new, something beautiful. From that moment on, our relationship blossomed. We spent more and more time together, and with each passing day, I found myself falling deeper in love with him. He made me feel safe, cherished, and most importantly, whole. Eventually, we moved in together, and life took on a new rhythm, one filled with laughter, love, and the kind of peace I had never known before. Oliver wasn't just my partner, he was my best friend, my confidant, and the person who had helped me find my way back to myself. And then, a year after we had first reconnected, Oliver proposed to me under a sky full of stars. I said yes without hesitation, tears of joy streaming down my face as I realized that I had truly found my second chance at happiness. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair, surrounded by close friends and family. As I stood at the altar, holding Oliver's hands, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. I had been through so much, endured so much heartache, but in the end, it had all led me to this moment, to a life filled with love, hope, and the promise of a brighter future. And as Oliver and I exchanged vows, I knew with all my heart that this was my rebirth. The past was behind me, and ahead of me lay a future filled with endless possibilities. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was Victoria, the woman who had survived, who had rebuilt, and who had found love again. And in Oliver's arms, I knew that I was finally home. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.